All right. Well, my name is Kyle Shagnon. I am the marketing manager here at OpFocus. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this Friday afternoon. We're excited to get started with our very first ever CPQ office hours. Many of you submitted questions when registering, and you're welcome to drop additional questions at any time into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. David will be answering as many questions as time will allow for, and the session will be recorded and made available to you on Monday. With that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our expert today, David Movsesian, the Director of CPQ Consulting at OpFocus and a Salesforce expert holding a certifications as Salesforce Admin, Sales Cloud Consultant, and CPQ Specialist. Dave has 30 plus years of experience in sales management, and business operations. And our CPQ team as a whole has completed approximately 50 CPQ projects in implementation, optimization, and rescue. They understand the importance of listening to your team and implementing CPQ in a way that works with how you do business. So with that being said, Dave, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
I'm going to have some slides, Kyle, that you want to share. Just wanted to introduce myself. My name is David Movsesian. I'm the Director of CPQ Consulting for OpFocus. Joined OpFocus in 2015 after roughly 30 years in sales management, sales operations, business operations, and Salesforce administration. Shortly after coming here, we started the Salesforce CPQ practice just before the acquisition when it was still Steelbrick. So in that time, I and my team have delivered approximately 50 CPQ projects and gleaned a lot of knowledge from that. So we're looking to share that with the folks out there either looking to implement or struggling with maybe an existing implementation. So we're happy to be here today. All right. So on our website, if you're looking to hear from the experiences of some of the other folks that have done CPQ projects with us, there are some use cases that show some testimonials from these folks. These are the top two are fairly recent. They're interesting projects. Ben Breyer at Central Reach, they actually implemented CPQ prior and brought us in to help sort of heal the implementation, and we had some great results there. Red Canary and Threat Stack, we worked with them from the start to do those implementations, and they've been very happy with the results. And I think the vast majority of the clients we've worked with have had similar things to say. But those are available on our website, a lot of detail if you're interested in digging into that a little deeper. Kyle?
Yes. So when asking a question, I'll go ahead and unmute you so that you can explain your question to David. Please state your name, your role, and the number of CPQ users that you have, and then you'll have 1 minute to ask your question and elaborate on it so that David can answer it correctly. He'll then take about 5 to 8 minutes to answer your question to the best of his ability within that time. We do want to make sure that we're able to get to as many questions as possible. So with that being said, Dave, do you want to start with the Q&A?
Sure. So I know some people are still dialing in, and we had some questions submitted in advance, and I see some of the folks that are online have asked questions too. I wanted to lead though with one of the more common questions that we saw submitted in advance, which was from folks that are trying to justify CPQ to their organization. They're looking to implement and trying to convince members of the senior staff that this is the right thing to do. So obviously there's a lot of articles out there about the costs and benefits of CPQ. Typically, those companies who have a SaaS-based business, I think, benefit the most from a CPQ implementation, in part because the configure price quote piece, which is the front end, the opening transaction, is obviously where you see the big bang when you see demos. But it's really the flow of the information from new business to contract, amending the contract and renewing that you see the real benefit. So OpFocus is primarily working with SaaS organizations, and CPQ just fits right into that nicely. So for anybody who has a SaaS business, CPQ is almost a must-have, and I think it just helps you generate your transactions cleanly, create your contracts to be able to see what people own, and then the renewals piece, because when you get to renewals, you're obviously looking at what do they own, what did they pay for it, what should they pay for it when they renew, and when are they up for renewal. So all those things are available and constantly dynamically refreshed within CPQ. So for anybody who has a renewals business that perhaps is struggling, and that usually is one of the areas that struggles, it's very manual. A lot of companies even have a difficult time understanding what their clients own. The flow of that information is key. Obviously, increased accuracy and efficiency of your sales team, standardized quotes that go out to your clients. So all those, and there's plenty of articles and documents and slides out there for that, and we can share some of those offline for those of you who are interested. The other thing I wanted to bring up in relation to that is there were some folks who had requested a demo. I love to give demos, so I'd be happy to work with anybody who's interested in seeing a demo and doing that offline with some of your key stakeholders and talking through the benefits of that and being able to see it in action. I think that's where you really see it. So I did want to open up because I think Robert, we were one of the first people to dial in, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask your question. I don't know if you want to identify yourself on the recording or not, but David, if you want to give Robert a chance to speak. And Robert, you had asked about some pricing questions and some issues about beginning of a subscription period if you don't know it in advance. Wondering if you wanted to share that.
Yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
First, thanks for doing this. My name is Robert Banks, Director of Sales Operations at Vestmark in Wakefield, so not too far from, I think, where you guys are located.
Yep.
We do not have any CPQ application in place today. In fact, we're just sort of introducing product codes into the selling process. So just with that as a backdrop, some things I'm looking at are if you don't know when the subscription period begins, because so we're a SaaS provider, but there's an implementation process that has to happen, having to do with like data migrations. And so if a subscription period begins upon, for lack of a better way of saying it, like a customer acceptance, how do you handle that? Because you can't really quote, it can't be included in the quote as a finite date. It's more sort of relative. That's one question. So I'll stop because I have another one if there's time.
Sure, let's tackle that one and then we'll hit your other question. So when you are quoting in CPQ, especially when it's a subscription product, the duration of the product is key, right? The duration of the term, identifying that this is a 12, 24, 36-month period. The start date is a required field. We want to know when it's going to start, but we also know that those things can change. It could be that you put a start date in, what is it right now, June 12th of July 1, but it takes 4 weeks to close the deal, and you got to go back and clean that up. So we know that start dates move. So a couple of things here. First of all of this information is going to sync to your opportunity, and when the time comes when you can win your deal, you have a couple of options. One is you can contract it immediately, and you can adjust the start date on the contract. Okay, so you don't have to activate your contract instantly. In fact, most companies that we deal with prefer to have that manual intervention because maybe there's an installation period or something that has to happen before the subscriptions can start. So the contract may be created with a start date, but you have the option to go in and move it and then activate your contract. Second option is through the use of orders, and especially if you have advanced order management, where you can have a deal, and let's just say that we put July 1 in there. But when the time comes, we say, well, we actually may even have to stage this out and do half of them in mid-July and half of them in mid-August. So you have the option through advanced order management to actually split that into multiple orders and assign the start date, right? So that you'll end up with a set of subscriptions possibly that start on different dates. And then you contract from the order. So your contract will ultimately consist of subscriptions that have different start dates. They'll have the same term, which means if you started half of them a month later, that half will have an end date that's a month later than the others. But come renewal time, you can co-term upon renewal. So the second year, the second term, if you will have, for example, the full 12 months for that first set that got deployed, but maybe only 11 months because the other one's deployed a month later. And then come the end of year 2, you're all trued up and co-termed, all right? And the system will do that for you.
Okay.
Does that help?
I think so. Yep.
Good.
You have time for a second question?
Absolutely.
Burn my
Absolutely.
minute. It has to do with, again, we're somewhat new to using product codes in the selling process. And so right now, loosely for a particular piece of functionality, we price it. It could be based on multiple units of measure. So by that, I mean, you buy a particular service and there could be like a fixed fee, which is like, part of it. And then on an ongoing basis, you pay as, I don't know, like percentage of assets under management or based on something else. So, for one offering, call it, there are two sort of different contributors to the final price. One could be like a fixed price, like a non-recurring. The other one can be recurring, but it's this, it's one product that we're selling. How do you?
Yep, that's actually very common. In fact, even going back to the perpetual license and the support, or a piece of hardware and support, you basically have a separate offering for each of those. So that fixed fee item, and I think you said a percent of total line, would be two separate offerings. Now, you don't have to show them all. You can create these little bundles and sub-bundles that do that work for you, but we don't have to display them or present them to a client. You just use them for the purpose of calculation, or we can show them. Obviously, in the case of say a piece of hardware or a perpetual license that doesn't recur, just the maintenance does, and the maintenance will carry forward on the resulting renewal. You'll see the subscription for that going forward, while the other piece is a one-time line item. The same thing is true if you have different services, right? A service is a one-time service, and then you have something else that may be recurring. So those would be represented as two separate lines, and whether or not you choose to show that to the client is up to you. You can certainly disguise that and make it look like a single offering and just use those layers underneath it to arrive at the price.
Okay, that makes sense.
That makes sense. And as far as product codes in our world are just a way to give a unique identifier to every SKU, to every offering. We use it, it's very important that we have some sort of a unique identifier. We use it in the configuration, especially if there's configuration rules that say, if you buy this, you must buy that. And having those product codes for that purpose is important. Again, whether or not you show them to your customers doesn't matter, as long as we have some sort of a unique identifier available to us for configuration purposes. And I'll also say that I don't think it's necessary all the time to make product codes mean something. A lot of companies put a lot of thought into the first 3 characters mean this, and the next 3 characters mean that, and then it becomes kind of a maintenance nightmare as you go forward. So as long as they're unique, I don't know that it's necessary that they have meaning.
Got it. But just to confirm my understanding, so in the scenario we talked about with the 2 different pricing styles, would there be 3? I'll call them air quote, product codes. One would be representative at the top level, call it the bundle, and then there'd be 2 underneath, so 3 in total.
Potentially. So if for example, you wanted to show that container SKU to the customer and just have a different naming convention for it, and just use those lines to do the calculation and push the pricing up. That top line will have some package pricing where it rolls up. It's the sum of its parts, right? Alternatively, you can have, for example, product A be the parent and product B, say the support, be the child of that. And that way you don't have to have that separate container. I think we would want to probably look with you at the products and see which way makes sense, because there's arguments to be made both ways and every customer is different. So it depends on what the offering ultimately looks like and how you want to present it to your client. We don't want to create unnecessary data in your system through that third product, but sometimes that is the best way to present it cleanly to your client.
Got it. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate the questions. I saw a familiar name dial in. I have some questions from it in advance, but Stephanie, did you have anything you wanted to share or ask?
Can you guys hear me?
Sure can.
So I had a number of questions. So we're not a SaaS business. We are an enterprise software business. And we have some unique challenges around pricing. So we haven't done CPQ yet. We were actually looking at the out-of-the-box scenario in Salesforce to just set up pricing to go into a new ERP system. And as we are doing that, we realize that our pricing models and structures and how we need to handle revenue recognition under the new ASC 606 model, as well as being able to quote or track different price lists that may not be standard, really wasn't going to be easy as an out of the box. Right. So my questions are more around how we can configure custom pricing that's not on standard for different customers, or be able to track historical pricing that may have been different at a different point in time versus sort of where we are now, and track all of that for our customers.
Sure. So first thing is, I wouldn't try to do that with standard Salesforce quoting. That's a great tool for the basic stuff, but you mentioned ASC 606 compliance, and that immediately screams for CPQ. So if that's important, and I think it's becoming more and more important for everybody, then the ability to attribute revenue to different types of products, whether it's a product or a license or a service or maintenance or whatever it is critical. And that's when you get into this. When you start breaking it up into multiple products like that, to be able to identify that and be compliant, trying to do that in a standard, adding opportunities to opportunity products to an opportunity, or adding quotes to a quote, the interface is just challenging, and it just doesn't give you the flexibility you need. But I will say that is a good CPQ. I know that sounds a little self-serving, but it is kind of screaming for CPQ. As far as the pricing goes, that's one of the benefits of the tool, is there's a lot of flexibility for defining custom pricing. The standard models for pricing within Salesforce, you have the list pricing model, which says you identify a list price in your price book, and that is the price. That is the per unit price, if you will. You can use discount schedules to automatically assign the tiered pricing based on volume and on term. And then the second piece is block pricing. So block pricing is kind of like a phone plan or a storage plan, where it's up to X is $5,000, up to Y is $10,000. And it doesn't matter where you fall in between, it's $5,000 or it's $10,000. And so that's the block pricing. And the third standard model is called slab pricing, which is almost never used, although as a former sales manager and sales guy, it was one of my favorites. I think I've only used it a couple of times. And that's a tiered model of pricing that allows you to give volume discounts, but not give away the farm up front. Meaning, you say 1 through 10 is $10 a piece, and 11 through 20 is $8 a piece. Instead of, if they come in and buy 20 units, they don't just get the $8 price, which is what you would get for list pricing. They would say the first 10 are at 10 and the second 10 are at 8. And those are the standard models. There's also percent of total pricing. So when you have maintenance that has a percent of total price, you can do that and determine what products on the quote should contribute to that percent of total. And you can have a minimum or a maximum amount on those as well. But your question about custom pricing for one, and customer or agreed upon or contracted pricing for another. Start with the custom pricing. As long as you're not using block pricing or slab pricing, which sort of take over your system, if we can figure out a way to deliver using the list pricing model, then there's this option within Salesforce to configure using price rules. And we can define criteria just like you would in Excel, basically, to say, if this, then inject this value, or go retrieve a value from a lookup table. Right? There's all kinds of things we can do to inject custom values as the price. And those contributing factors, those conditions can be, who is the customer? Where is the customer? How long have they been a customer? What type of customer are they, right? We can, anything that you want to identify at the customer, at the opportunity, at the quote level, at the product level, to say, what conditions contribute to the calculation of the price. As I said, if you can do it in Excel, you can generally do it in Salesforce. Then you have the concept of customer contracted pricing. So if you have a negotiated price for a customer and you want that to be their price, you've agreed that this is their price, they get a better price than everybody else. If they come back and add on more, or they when they renew, you can identify a customer contracted price for any product or group of products. It can be a fixed number to say this customer, instead of $10, pays $8, period. And when they come back and add more, the system will automatically look to say, does this customer have a contracted price in place? If so, that overrides everything else. Okay. And so that's the first thing. Custom contracted prices can be a price. It can be a percentage discount off a specific product, or you can base it on say a family of products, a group of products. And so you can calculate customer prices, that customer contracted prices that way. You can also have an effective and an end date. So if you say, look, we're going to honor this price for up to 1 year or up to 2 years, that will be in place up until that expiration date happens, and any subsequent deal that they come back for, if they come back and do an amendment or a renewal, whatever it is, that will be honored up until that expiration date. So those are traditionally the ways that we would deal with that. There was one piece I left out. When you have a tiered pricing model, you have it, say, with quantity breaks, you can have a customer specific set of tiers. So you have a discount schedule, but you can make them customizable so that customer gets, the tier 1 at $2 less and tier 2 at $3 less, or whatever it is, so that they can have their own discount schedule. And as long as that contracted price is in place, they'll be able to, we'll be honoring that. The last piece of your question was being able to look back and see what they paid at any given time. So obviously you always have the quotes and the opportunities in your system to look back on, but you have the subscriptions and assets as well that were generated from those. So when we close, win an op or contract an order, we create the contract, subscriptions, and any assets, the assets being any one-time deal. And those will have the pricing from that time, obviously, and you'll be able to look back and see, what did they purchase, when did they purchase it, in what quantity, and what did they pay, what discretionary discount did we give them. All that information is stored. Did I hit all your points, Stephanie?
Yes, I think so. And we do use all of those different pricing models, including
Good.
One customer with slab pricing. So
really, I like
yes.
slab. The thing about block pricing and slab pricing, I do say though, when you use those models within CPQ, they basically take over the pricing on that line. In other words, if you have block pricing, I can't say, yeah, this block, but I want to adjust it by X%, using a rule. The rules really have no effect on block and slab pricing. That's all done under the covers, and that is their price. You can have a discretionary discount, but you don't have the leeway that you would have with the standard list pricing or unit price model to just inject different values in there and have all kinds of control. But there's obviously use cases for all of those.
Great, thank you.
Sure. All right. I'm going to dig in a little bit here. There's actually several questions that were offered in advance. And I did say at the beginning that anybody who wants a demo, they can reach out to me or to their sales rep and be happy to arrange that. Let me see. There is a question about migrating licenses or migrating data from standard quotes or from whatever tool that you have into Salesforce CPQ. And I'm gonna preface this with a little different spin on this. When we implement Salesforce CPQ, we're always looking at it, and the clients are always looking at it as primarily as how do I get a transaction in the system. Selecting the right products, configuring it correctly, enforcing the correct rules, getting the right pricing, getting the document out to the customer. But there's more to it than that. And you need to be thinking with whatever you do about what happens downstream when you come back to do an amendment, when you come back to do a renewal, right? You need to be thinking about those downstream things. And one of the things I've seen in some implementations is so much focus was put on how do I get the transactions in without the thought about what happens when I amend it, what happens when I renew it. First thing is this, when you implement Salesforce CPQ, implement the full sales cycle, new business, amendments, and renewals. I've been pulled in to a few implementations done by other partners or even done by clients who've chosen to implement themselves, and they didn't implement the creation of the contracts or the amendments or the renewals. And now all they can do is new business. And when their sales reps needed to do an amendment or needed to do a renewal, they were creating new business transactions. And at that point, you're just creating a lot of noise in your system that isn't really working for you. So the first thing I always recommend is don't try to break out the implementation of CPQ in phases by features, right? Don't just do new business first and figure you'll come back to amendments and renewals later. Amendments and renewals can be implemented in a fairly straightforward way to get you started. There's obviously a lot of things to think about when you, as time goes on, that you can use to enhance that. How are renewals priced is one of the things. But making sure that you're thinking about your amendments and renewals is important. Now, to the question that was submitted, the question had to do with getting your historical data into the system, because when you implement CPQ, unless you're starting your business on the same day that you implement CPQ, you've probably got some historical sales data. You may or may not have it in Salesforce. So if you have those customers that can come back and do an amendment or come back and do a renewal, it's important to have that data in your system. Okay, so on day one, ideally, you would want at least some of that data in your system. And for clients who have a lot of it, I'm dealing with folks that have anywhere from 50 existing active contracts to 50,000, and it's anywhere in the spectrum in between. So it really depends on what we're talking about. When I speak about this, I'm speaking about specifically active contracts, because those are the things that you can either amend or renew, right? And we need to make sure that the data is in the system in a way that Salesforce CPQ can consume it. So there is a process for doing it via data load. Part of our scoping conversations when we are talking to you about your project, I sometimes kick this can down the road a little bit if you have a fairly complex model, or if you have fairly complex or convoluted data, and I'll talk about that in a second. But when we build out your system, the important thing is to figure out what it's going to take to get existing data in to be able to be consumed by CPQ. We need to know the state of your existing data, the volume of your existing data, and what are we going to build? Because we need to know if we need to do, what kind of transformation needs to be done to get that data into the system in a way that CPQ understands it. To the question earlier when we were talking about bundles, I've had instances where in the past, those were sold as a single line item, and maybe you figured it out in Excel or on a calculator and sold it as a price, but you didn't have it broken out as a fixed fee and a percent of total line. But that's how it's going to be going forward. So you have a few options, right? You can have the data accessible to you, even if it's not in Salesforce, and just decide that come renewal time, we're going to put it into Salesforce the way we want it. Or you can load it into Salesforce as those separate line items and figure out what is the price for the fixed fee and what is the price for that percent of total line, and then load those in as assets and subscriptions in a way that can be consumed by CPQ. But it's really important that you have that data available. It does not all have to be in there on day one. I've told clients this, that when somebody comes forward and they say they have a few dozen or even a few hundred active contracts, sometimes it makes sense if you have complicated bundles in your system that are a significant transformation from the way you used to look at your data. Sometimes that's real hard to load. And if you have a limited number of contracts that you have to create, we'll sometimes make a recommendation that let's just transact them in Salesforce, create an opportunity in a quote, get it in the way you like it. We call it a legacy opportunity so it doesn't flag on any of your reports, and contract that to create those records that are perfectly structured for CPQ to consume. So we might do something like that. The other piece of this, as I mentioned, is the state of your data. So getting in and understanding what your data looks like. And then the last thing, when we talk about how do we get data into your system, is what is the level of transformation? A lot of organizations use a CPQ implementation to as a transformational moment, right? We used to sell it this way. We've always wanted to sell it this other way, but we haven't been able to do that without a tool like CPQ. This is our moment. And you take that moment and you repackage it and you create your bundles and you adjust, you change the pricing to what you've always wanted to be, which is completely different from the way you've been selling it for some number of years. And it's very difficult to take unstructured data or data. It's very difficult to take unstructured data and try to move it in. It's just as, it's challenging to take data that is structured but needs to be completely transformed and put into this system. So we would have to spend some time to look at those elements, right? What would we build for you? Are we going to use bundles? Are we going to use nested bundles, right? And what is the state and volume of your data today so that we can figure out what transformation is necessary and therefore what approach to take, okay? And I don't know if the person who asked that question was on the call. I don't think she was at the time. I do see some folks have joined, and I think Kayla, I see Kayla on there. Kayla, you had a question, and I think we touched on it a little bit, but welcome, first of all. And you had asked about justifying the cost to get budget approval. So you're thinking about CPQ, and you're trying to come up with ways to justify the expense to your management team. Is that, do you want to speak to that at all? David, can you unmute Kayla? There you go.
Yes. Yeah, so we just added on a bunch of licenses. We've got some, really big initiatives coming up. And so obviously CPQ, not that the price isn't justified, it's just a heavy bill. So when it comes across the CFO's desks, they want to know, why should we implement this? And why can't we just continue to do things the way that we already are? So some of maybe the main talking points, the differentiators of this is kind of why we need it. This is what we'll be able to do.
Okay. CFOs are usually the ones that love CPQ. So usually that's not where the pushback comes from. They love the idea that the transactions are going to be clean, the sales are going to be clean, they're going to be, all the revenue is going to be in the right buckets. So they're usually the ones that love it. Especially, we spoke a little bit earlier about ASC 606 compliance, and they're the ones that are on the hook for that. So generally the CFOs, whenever I'm in a room full of people, and it's been a while now, but whenever I'm in a room full of people and we're showing the data that's available to you, the transactional data that's available to you, and how structured it is, and the visibility that you get, and what comprises a deal, and the MRR and ARR buckets, and what was your expansion, and what was your, what did you have for expansion, contraction, renewal churn, churn on amendments, all this data that's available to you. It's usually the CFO that's nodding his head the most. They love it. So I think one of the things, we did touch on this a little bit earlier about sort of the benefits of CPQ, but we may decide to do, if you want, a call, if you want, with even some of your stakeholders to talk through some of the challenges that you're having. For example, if you care to share, David, I think you need to unmute her again. If you care to share, maybe what are some of the things that you're thinking about that are leading you down the path where you're suggesting CPQ to your organization? What are some of maybe the pain points you're experiencing?
Yeah, so we have some disparate systems right now. All of our billing and our financing goes through NetSuite engine. And not only that, we had an equity firm buy a couple of different companies last summer. And so now we're kind of in the process of merging these companies. Mm-hmm. So there's a portion of each sales team that's coming under one umbrella, which is going to be the North American sales team that was currently disparate between all of these different companies. And so now we need a single source of data and a single platform for all the sales rep to be able to sell everything that we offer under one bundling, and a neat way to be able to track it.
Okay. So you're consolidating all the offerings, and everybody's going to be selling a smaller core of products, or people are going to be selling all these other products that came as part of the acquisition? There's
going to be, it's not even that it's smaller or bigger, it's just that it's bundled in a different way now. So all of our offerings are the same. It's just you can get front office, you can get back office, or you can get payroll. We work at a HCM company, so we offer guard tracking, HCM, payroll, time and labor management. So we have some bundled pricing. So each of the salespeople within North America will be able to sell those specific bundles. Mm-hmm. But now they're all going to be certified to be able to sell all of our offerings, as opposed to only selling each company's previous offerings.
So they are not necessarily as familiar with some of those other offerings, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And are the bundles configurable where you have some options, some components that you can choose to add or choose not to add, or some that are required or recommended, or are they all prepackaged, hard solutions?
They're fixed. Yeah, they're prepackaged. Okay. This is what we're getting.
Okay. So so without CPQ, what companies usually do is they reference those hard bundles, if you will, those non-configurable bundles as a single SKU. Okay. Now the challenge obviously is sometimes those bundles, and I don't have this information yet from you, but sometimes those different components are comprised of things that are a fixed item. We spoke a little bit earlier in the call about percent of total. Maybe there's a maintenance or a support component to it. And there's the various pieces of that bundle. And even if it's not configurable, the components fall into different buckets, right? So from your finance guy's perspective, he wants to know how much of this revenue is licensing revenue, how much of this is maintenance revenue, how much of this is services revenue, and you go into that. And that's, again, as you move towards this whole ASC 606, you need to know what buckets things fall into. So in the traditional model where you're just picking, say, a single line item, you lose that. Now, obviously, without a tool like CPQ, you can select each individual line or even create code to automatically select different things, but then you're in the business of maintaining code, which most people don't want to do. So when you have a tool like this, it gives you the opportunity to create those components if they fall into those different buckets, so you can recognize the portions of the revenue that go to the right buckets. You can package that up as different offerings, even if you never show it to the rep, even if you never show it to the client. They're part of the ingredients, right, that fall into, that comprise that SKU that you do show, so that your finance folks can divvy up that revenue when it passes down to NetSuite, and NetSuite knows what to do with it. It knows what's the fixed fee items, what are the maintenance lines or support lines or licensing lines, and it knows all of that. So having a tool that allows you to combine those things, even if you don't disclose all those subcomponents to your internal users or your external your clients, that'll be key. The other thing you mentioned was, you know, you've got salespeople that are going to be selling things that came into the organization from acquisition, or maybe some of the salespeople came along with the acquisitions. But you have groups of people that are going to be selling things they're not as familiar with. So having some sort of structure around the packaging that guides them, you know, puts those guardrails on the sales so that they have room to negotiate, but no more than you're willing to give them. Gives that structure and helps them get over that learning curve. There's a feature that you'll hear when you talk through CPQ. If you speak to Salesforce or anybody like that that's selling the licenses, they'll talk to you about things like guided selling. And guided selling is basically a way when you have a group of salespeople that maybe aren't familiar with the products, or for growing organizations that are constantly hiring new people and trying to ramp them and teach them how to ask the right questions. Guided selling offers the option to create, it's basically, think of it as a set of search filters that are presented in the form of questions. So you ask this question first, and based on your answer, you ask another question, and based on that answer, you ask another question. And it just takes that whole set of product offerings and strips it down to which is the SKU or the couple of SKUs that maybe are relevant based on the answers that you gave. I will tell you that basically, as I said, it's guided selling is a different presentation for search filters. I will tell you that it's very rare that people actually implement it because they usually feel by the time they see it that the search filters themselves, which are available on screen, are good enough. They work. But the feature's there. And again, I think it's especially interesting for companies who are hiring very quickly and constantly bringing on new people and helping them ramp up. So that's another one of those selling points. The last thing to help you justify is obviously the visibility into your data, to know what your customers own, when they're up for renewal, what is their renewal pricing. We haven't spoken yet about renewal pricing. I'll give you an example though, and there is a case study out on the website that we showed a screen earlier, but there is a case study out there for a client that I actually recently worked with who implemented Salesforce CPQ with another partner and then brought us in to tidy it up. They did a couple of things, right? Their first mistake was they didn't implement amendments and renewals, which I spoke about earlier, the importance of doing that. But there was a lot of data that they just didn't have good visibility to, the way the products were structured, the way they were showing MRR and ARR. For example, we came in and we calculate MRR and ARR at the line level. But we not only do that, but we actually show you on a subsequent amendment or a renewal, how much of this was expansion, how much was contraction, how much was product churn. At the time of renewals, the same thing. So you can start to have better visibility into what's going on your transactions at midterm through amendments and at the time of renewal. And the other thing that this gave them when we started to really clean up their data, we pushed this stuff live just a couple of months ago, I think. And I had a call with him shortly after, just, how are we doing? How's it going? He said, oh, we're in fire drill mode. And I thought, things had gone haywire. And he said, no, it's not CPQ. It's just that we now have such visibility into our data that we're seeing things that were wrong before and we just didn't know it. And suddenly they had all this extra visibility that they didn't have before, and they were fixing problems that were previously ingrained in the business. They just didn't know it was a problem until we gave them exposure to it. So it was sort of I don't want to say it was accidental, but it was a benefit that I don't think he'd really counted on when we were doing all this work. So again, when I come back and say the CFOs are usually the ones nodding their heads, it's for all those reasons. And I'd be happy to get on a call with you at some point with whoever these folks are, whether it's the sales management team or ops or finance or legal or anybody, and we can talk through this. You see, I get a little worked up.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Did I answer your question for you, Kayla?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Thank you. Great. I don't know if anybody else has any questions, but I'll just jump into there were questions about bundles and pricing. I think we talked about that There was a question about the flow of data, and that gets into the contracts and subscriptions and assets, and what happens to those. And so generally the flow, when we talk about a transaction, and you mentioned, Kayla, you mentioned that you're working with NetSuite on the back end, and as long as there's no Salesforce people on the line, I can say that, yeah, that's fine. We have a lot of folks that use NetSuite as their back end. The important thing to understand is that when you implement Salesforce CPQ, it sits sort of beside your opportunity. And people talk about integration. It's not integration, it's native to Salesforce, but it sort of sits next to your opportunity, and it's creating your transactions, and it's giving you all the structure you need to create your transactions and get them accurate, get accurate pricing. And then it uses that to pass the information over to the opportunity products and the opportunity. And so then when you talk about a NetSuite implementation or NetSuite integration, you're really connecting NetSuite not to CPQ, you're connecting it to opportunities and opportunity products, or to orders and order products if you've implemented orders, right? So those are the objects that pretty much any NetSuite implementation, when you're connecting it to Salesforce, are going to connect to, whether you have CPQ or not. So it doesn't change anything. It's just you now have an engine to help you enforce the rules you want to enforce, to pick the right products, to price them correctly, to help manage your amendments and your renewals. But ultimately, it feeds back to those standard objects. And so that whether you have an existing integration with NetSuite to Salesforce, or you're thinking about integrating it, it's to those standard objects and not CPQ. And then ultimately, passing it down to some of the custom objects, part of the package for contract subscriptions and assets, and then obviously the whole flow back to an amendment op, which updates your renewal, and then a renewal opportunity and quote. So it's a big cycle. And if we were to do a demo, I can show you that whole thing in about 35 minutes to show you the whole flow. Maybe in a future session we'll just do a demo, but I'd be happy to do that. And I'm watching my clock because I was told I have to stop at 10 of. So I hope you all got something out of this, and I know Kyle is champing at the bit to kind of wrap me up and talk about some follow-up items. But thank you.
Thank you, David. That was extremely informational. I'm glad we were able to get to so many questions while on the call. I just want to go ahead and I'll pull this up. We shared it earlier, but this references a lot of or a couple of the case studies that Dave had mentioned. They're all available on our website if you wanted to review them. A lot of folks do find, especially if you are trying to drive that value add, that they're extremely helpful in that regard. And just a last piece of content here. If you did enjoy this, we do have a lot of events coming up. Specifically on the 26th, we are holding a similar Ask Me Anything. This one will focus around development and integrations. It'll be with our Senior VP of Technology, MJ Khan. So if you do have questions about a project that you're in the middle of or that you're considering, we invite you to take part in that. We also have 2 additional training workshops coming up. The first is a 5-day course around Salesforce administration on June 26th through the 22nd through the 26th, my apologies. It's perfect for anyone on your team that's thinking about taking Salesforce admin certification, or if they just really want to become much more adept at how they use Salesforce. The second is a hands-on Salesforce reporting workshop. That'll be on July 7th through 8th. It's really will dive deep into the Salesforce reporting and how you're able to use it to gain insight into your sales process and really better leverage data to improve your ROI. So again, if you did find this session informational, we do invite you to take part in any and all of the coming events, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you again for your time, David. It was very, very informational, and I definitely enjoyed it.
Thank you, everybody.
I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you all for joining.